It is truly a marvel to take a moment and ruminate over the intrinsic resilience that often lies veiled within the things that we view as delicate and vulnerable. Let's take the example of eggshells. At first glance, they seem ever so delicate. Yet, as we discovered through innocent experiments in our childhood, they possess a structural integrity that allows them to withstand considerable pressure when handled adeptly. Another enchanting illustration of hidden resilience is found in the famous butterfly effect, where the gentle caress of a butterfly's wings, through seemingly inconsequential, has the potential to set off a cascade of atmospheric events that can culminate in the roaring tempest of a hurricane across distant oceans. Now, let us not forget the human heart. Now, it is often characterized as susceptible to the wounds of sorrow and heartache, yet it is, in fact, an incredibly sturdy muscle that tirelessly pumps at an astonishing rate of 70 times per minute throughout the span of our lives, seldom wavering. And dreams, all those tender fragments of our aspirations and hopes, wrapped in the diaphanous cloak of vulnerability, display a tenacity that defies their ethereal nature, making them incredibly resilient and often insurmountable. But as we marvel at these tales of resilience, it's also imperative to recognize and give credence to the very fragility inherent in certain elements of our existence. These, my friends, require unwavering vigilance and nurturing. Chief among these is the domain of civil rights. Civil rights, as cherished, fundamental, and indispensable as they are, sadly often carry with them a fragility that beseeches our constant and undivided attention. They serve as a bulwark, protecting and empowering individuals. Yet their very existence and efficacy can be as brittle as porcelain, easily shattered or worn down. Civil rights do not bloom naturally, nor are they eternally immutable. They are bestowed upon and nurtured by meticulously woven legal and societal frameworks. Their roots are not anchored in stone, but rather in the ever-shifting sands of societal norms and political landscapes, which contribute significantly to their delicate nature. Civil rights can wax and wane through the ages as different societies, cultures, and political ideologies perceive and value them diversely. This dynamism requires that we remain vigilant, adaptive, and unfaltering in our commitment to advocating for and protecting civil rights. Civil rights are in many ways the heartbeat of a society. They throb and pulsate with the collective resolve and participation of individuals and institutions alike. A society that reveres equality, justice, and human dignity can imbue life into civil rights. Conversely, if apathy, indifference, or discrimination take root, civil rights can wither like a parched flower. These rights are susceptible to the ebb and flow of societal norms and the capriciousness of political landscapes, contributing significantly to their fragility. The recognition and protection of civil rights are not constants, but variables, oscillating across different eras, regions, and cultural contexts. For instance, what one society may uphold as a fundamental right, another might disregard or suppress entirely. The journey towards progress in advancing civil rights is not a smooth, straight path. It is a route laden with setbacks, challenges, and hurdles that necessitate enduring vigilance and, most importantly, passionate advocacy. Furthermore, the survival and progression of civil rights hinge on the collective commitment of individuals and institutions. They are not solitary battles to be fought, but collective endeavors that require active participation from all sectors of society. Civil rights demand societies that uphold the principles of equality, justice, and human dignity. In the presence of apathy, indifference, or active discrimination, these rights become endangered, teetering on the precipice of neglect or outright rejection. Therefore, the struggle for civil rights is not a one-time achievement, not one-time achievement to be celebrated and then just thrown away and forgotten. It's an ongoing battle, an enduring quest to uphold, expand, and safeguard these rights for every single member of our society. The fragility of civil rights is further underscored by their vulnerability to legal and policy changes. Laws, after all, are not set in stone. They can be amended, repealed, or interpreted differently, affecting the degree of protection provided to civil rights. Political shifts and changing public attitudes can either support or undermine efforts to uphold these rights, necessitating continuous advocacy and legal action to preserve and strengthen these rights. A prime example of this is the current wave of anti-LGBTQ plus legislation sweeping across the United States. The LGBTQ community is, after all, facing an alarming barrage of legislation designed to erase their visibility and curtail their rights. According to a recent report by the Movement Advancement Project, MAP, lawmakers in a staggering 46 states have introduced more than 650 anti-LGBTQ bills in 2023 alone. Significantly, MAP's research shines a harsh spotlight on the targeting of young people, particularly transgender individuals, with over 160 school-specific bills designed to curtail LGBTQ rights being proposed within just the first 2 months of the year alone. Logan Casey, a senior policy researcher and advisor at MAP, has voiced deep concern about this troubling trend, emphasizing, quote, "We are witnessing an unsettling era of relentless assault on our communities, particularly transgender individuals. This significant surge in political attacks underscores the growing confidence of anti-LGBTQ activists. While we have seen previous attacks on the LGBTQ communities over the years, the current situation feels markedly different and profoundly terrifying for many." End quote. The current surge in legislative proposals concerning education and healthcare is of particular concern. A deeply disturbing number of bills seek to restrict access to gender-affirming healthcare for transgender youth. Furthermore, there is a notable push to regulate curriculum content in our public schools, again, specifically targeting discussions surrounding gender identity and sexuality. These developments emphasize the urgent need for dialogue, thoughtful consideration, and policies that prioritize comprehensive, inclusive education and healthcare for all individuals, including transgender youth. Consider the more than 125 bills that seek to prevent trans youth from accessing age-appropriate, medically necessary, and best practice healthcare. Over 45 bills aim to ban transgender students from participating in school sports, and more than 30 so-called bathroom bills have been introduced, surpassing previous year's numbers. Several states have proposed legislation that exemplifies this alarming trend. For instance, in Arizona, Senate Bill 1040 seeks to ban trans students and school personnel from using restrooms matching their gender identity. The proposed legislation would, get this, allow individuals to sue schools for restroom facility sharing. Meanwhile, in South Carolina, House Bill 3728 aims to censor curriculum and prohibit counseling or training regarding gender or sexual diversity in schools. In Texas, Senate Bill 17 seeks to prioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion offices at state colleges and universities, while Senate Bill 12 would criminalize drag performances. Florida, too, has been the staging ground for a flurry of anti-LGBTQ plus legislation. Laws such as House Bill 1069, which prohibits any instruction on sexual orientation or gender identity from pre-K through 8th grade, and Senate Bill 254, which penalizes providers for providing gender-affirming care, forbid public funds from covering such care, and allow for extraordinary jurisdiction in family courts based on a child's gender-affirming care. These bills have all been passed. Book bans in public schools across the United States have seen an alarming increase in the current academic year, in surging by 28%. The writers' organization PEN America reported that conservative efforts to restrict children's freedoms to read have led to an increase that surpasses figures from the previous 6 months. Their report, Banned in the USA, State Laws Supercharge Book Suppression in Schools, reveals that censorious legislation has been a significant driving force behind the growing restrictions on books and accessibility in our public schools and, by the way, our public libraries. Since July 2021, for instance, PEN America has documented over 4,000 instances of banned books, with 1,477 individual book bans affecting 874 unique titles during the first half of the current school year. Book bans are, of course, more prevalent in states governed by Republicans, with 7 districts in Texas and 13 in Florida, accounting for a significant number of the bans. Furthermore, 30% of the banned books in the current school year revolve around themes of, as you would expect, race, racism, or that feature characters of color, while 26% involve LGBTQ plus characters or themes. These worrying trends call for immediate attention and action in defending and protecting the rights, liberties, and intellectual freedom of individuals to ensure equality and equitable access across our diverse society. Such vigilance is crucial to raise awareness, advocate for inclusive policies, and build community support to counteract these regressive measures. By fostering a culture that values intellectual freedom and celebrates diversity, we can ensure the right of young minds to engage with a wide range of ideas and experiences. I stand before you today with an urgent call to attention. Our concern is required as we witness an increasing and unceasing flood of legislative bills designed with the intent to undermine civil rights. Our political and legal terrain is in a state of accelerated transformation. Alarmingly, the rate at which these new bills are being introduced is so rapid that even recently submitted bills become outdated within a short span of time. This frenetic pace casts a stark spotlight on the urgency and criticality and the magnitude of the continuing struggle to safeguard and progress civil rights. This relentless momentum underlines the pressing need for unwavering vigilance. The responsibility falls on each and every one of us as active participants to advocate relentlessly for justice, equality, and the preservation of fundamental rights that are due to every single individual. To resist these restrictive measures, it is absolutely essential that we maintain a constant state of awareness. Now, this requires us to persistently engage in advocacy, foster collaborations, and build alliances. Such actions and endeavors form the linchpin in our efforts to safeguard and fortify civil rights within our society. Moreover, these pursuits frequently necessitate individuals with audacious courage. The courage to raise their voices, the courage to assert their convictions, and the unwavering commitment to principles that drive them to challenge prevailing narratives. This is true even when standing against the tide of popular opinion, and even when their stance may seem to contradict their own positions. It is precisely through these acts of bravery and principle that progress is birthed. It is these actions that push the boundaries of what is possible, ignite meaningful discussions, and carve out the path towards a more inclusive and equitable future. But we must always bear in mind that the battle for civil rights is not a series of clear-cut victories, but a continuous journey. It is a journey punctuated by significant milestones that are hard-fought and hard-won. Whilst it's crucial to acknowledge and celebrate each step forward, each milestone that we achieve, it is of equal importance to recognize that the work is always far from complete. Achieving a civil rights milestone isn't a signal that the struggle is over. Rather, each milestone serves as a stepping stone, leading us towards a more just and inclusive society. Each victory represents a battle waged and won, a collective effort to dismantle systemic barriers and address societal injustices. However, we must understand that these victories are neither permanent nor are they guaranteed. They require an ongoing commitment, constant vigilance, and continued active participation. We must ensure that the rights and freedoms won are safeguarded and extended to every individual, irrespective of their race, their gender, their sexuality, their religion, or any other characteristic. The quest for civil rights demands resilience, as setbacks and obstacles are inevitable. Upholding and expanding civil rights requires relentless advocacy, education, and legislative efforts to dismantle discriminatory policies, to challenge ingrained biases, and promote equality for all. This journey forces us to confront the reality that progress is not always linear and that setbacks can and do occur, as we are well aware from the recent Supreme Court rulings. Each milestone that we reach in this ongoing battle serves as a testament to the power of collective action. It also underlines the significant impact individuals can have when they unite for a common cause. These milestones remind us of our need to persevere, to glean lessons from our past, and to remain steadfastly committed to the principles of justice, equality, and most importantly, human dignity. Even though the fight for civil rights may never truly be declared won, every milestone achieved moves us a step closer to a more equitable society. Each step forward serves as a call to arms for all of us to continue the work, to be catalysts for change, and to strive for a world where civil rights are more than just milestones, but they form the very bedrock upon which every individual's dignity and freedom are built. I urge you, my friends, to understand the importance of the call to uphold civil rights. It is a cry that demands our unyielding support and our collective efforts. And it is incumbent upon each and every one of us to raise our voices, to make ourselves heard against the chilling and gut-wrenching attacks on our LGBTQIA+ brothers, sisters, and non-binary family members. It is our responsibility to fight with every breath for their rights, their dignity, and their equality. And this continues across the spectrum, whether it's sexuality, gender, or race. In this battle, it is imperative to recognize that defending civil rights transcends our personal beliefs or our individual antipathies towards offensive speech. It is about upholding the most fundamental of principles: freedom. This includes the freedom of expression, even when we vehemently disagree with the views being expressed. Through our commitment to safeguarding the rights of every individual, regardless of their background, their identity, or their beliefs, we embody the values of a just and inclusive society. By protecting these rights, we are not merely persevering and preserving the status quo, but we're actively advancing the cause of justice. Please, let us cast aside our differences and unite in solidarity. Let us appreciate that the strength of our collective action is far greater than the sum of our individual efforts. By standing together, by speaking with one voice, we send a powerful message. A message that discrimination, prejudice, and censorship have no place in our society. We must confront and actively dismantle the barriers that curtail the rights and opportunities of our LGBTQIA+ community. We must champion policies that protect their rights, promote their well-being, and ensure their full inclusion in all spheres of society. We must educate ourselves and others, work to cultivate empathy, understanding, and most of all, acceptance. Our journey towards achieving true equality and justice for all is a continuous one. It is a path that requires our unceasing commitment and engagement. So, my friends, please, let us rise and stand up for civil rights. Let us stand guard against the forces of injustice, and let us remain unwavering champions of freedom, equality, and dignity for every individual in our vibrant and diverse communities. Together, we can envision and create a world where the rights of all individuals are cherished, protected, and held sacred. To assist us on this formidable journey, my guest today, returning for his second appearance on our show, is the Reverend Barry W. Lynn. Reverend Barry W. Lynn is a distinguished American civil rights activist, attorney, and ordained minister. He has devoted his life to advocating for religious freedom and the separation of church and state. His many publications include significant work such as Piety in Politics, The Right-Wing Assault on Religious Freedom, and God and Government, 25 years of fighting for equality, secularism, and freedom of conscience. Reverend Lynn's commitment to the fight for social justice goes far, far beyond just his church and state advocacy work. He has been actively involved in various civil rights causes, voicing his opposition against discrimination based on race, gender, sexual orientation, and other protected characteristics. He has consistently and passionately supported LGBTQ plus rights and has staunchly opposed legislation that threatens to undermine equality and inclusion. His work, though, also serves as a potent reminder that the fight for justice and equality demands both fervent advocacy and deep respect for the principles upon which our nation was founded. Reverend Lynn joins us today to discuss his recently published 3-book series, wittily titled Paid to Piss People Off. This series delves into topics of peace, porn, and prayer, a provocative choice of topics that is bound to stimulate thoughtful and engaging discussion. And we eagerly look forward to the insights and perspectives that Reverend Barry W. Lynn will share with us today. And that, my friends, is the final word up front. My name is Sean Sainhart, and this is Coup Save America. The Reverend Barry W. Lynn joins us right after the break, so stay tuned. Coup Save America will be right back. And in my hand, I've got book 1, Paid to Piss People Off. And this one covers peace. And again, before I bring Barry in, I just want to say, buy the books. Buy the books. They are incredibly funny. And they offer so much insights into the struggles and the battles that we're facing in this current time. And it's at times like these that we need people like Reverend Barry W. Lynn. And we need to acknowledge his work, appreciate the victories and his struggles that he has dedicated his entire life to upholding. And with that, my friends, I want to bring in the Reverend Barry W. Lynn, someone who, again, I truly admire and I'm proud to say is one of my heroes.
Thank you, Sean.
You know, the more I learn about you through your books, the more that I have to think to myself, how in the hell is this one man?
Well, I worked hard at making sure that I'd have 3 separate phases of work just so I could write a trilogy. And I wasn't going to call it Paid to Piss People Off. I was going to call it Fellowship of the Rings. But then I discovered there's some other guy who wrote a trilogy with the same name. So I had to revert back to Paid to Piss People Off. And the name of the book.
I was just going to ask you about that because this is a funny story.
So we had a party. We had many parties when we lived in Washington. And at one of them, a young man who was in high school came up to me and he said, Mr. Lynn, when I get out of school, I want to do what you do. And I looked at him and I said, Connor, what is it you think I do? And he said, I think you get paid to piss people off. I said, that was only the start. But yeah, he gave me a wonderful title.
You really did. You really did. And now I might have misread the books, but if it strikes me that you're a bit of a rabble rouser. Is that true, or did I misread that?
No, you absolutely did not misread that. I think that if you don't, I have a colleague used to fill in for him on the radio, Jim Hightower, who was the agriculture commissioner in Texas. And he had many wonderful sayings, but the one thing that he said that I have taken to heart, he said, the only things in the middle of the road are yellow stripes and dead skunks. And he is very, very accurate about that. I don't mean to irritate everyone. When in writing this book, in a single week, I talked on the phone both to Ron Kovic, the author of Born on the 4th of July, a staunch anti-war person to this day, and similarly, a couple days later, to Colonel Oliver North. I wouldn't want to get the two of them in a room together, but
No.
I consider both of them friends, because if you do the right thing, even some of the time, you're going to be a pal of mine. Even one thing. And the other thing people need to do, I think, is to be sure that when someone does you a favor, no matter how small they might think it is, you owe them payback, good payback.
Well, you have certainly lived true to that motto, and I would like to thank you on behalf of all Americans.
Thank you.
For the work that you've done. I mean, when I say that you are a hero, I mean that in the truest sense. You know, it's hard to describe your books, these new series, because it's part memoir, it's part instruction manual, it's part history of America, and the way that you blend it all together in such a readable, enjoyable, and I have to say fun. I love. I think that you. I know that you're a comedian somewhat, but your wit really has. What I enjoyed more than anything was seeing you contend with these hard right wingers and just use your wit to come back at them. Even audaciously in front of Congress, you've done this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the strangest things I did, I used to testify pretty regularly. And there was a guy who's, I think, left Congress now, a Texas Republican named Louis Gohmert. Louis Gohmert. Louis Gohmert was the guy, just for a little background, he was the guy who, right after the massacre at the movie theater in Colorado, when they were showing the Dark Knight movie, he came out and he said, first guy out the door, if there had only been more people with guns in that theater, this would not have happened. And nothing says to me, this is a great idea. Like in a dark movie theater, you hear some noise and you immediately pull out your gun and start shooting. But Louis Gohmert is a total idiot. And I'm glad he's not in Congress anymore, but don't worry, he's been replaced by even worse people, including Jim Jordan and so many others. But so I was testifying one day and he says, Reverend Lynn, why is it that you spend so much time trying to defend the Constitution instead of bringing people to Christ so they don't go to hell? He caveated with that. And I said, you know, Congressman, I have a feeling you and I have very different views about what hell is and who's there. But so he continued this. And I said, you know, I never deny what I believe about God. I could do that even at atheist conventions. I said I was just at one a couple months ago. I was introduced as the only theist that the guy introducing me would not want to convert to atheism. And Gohmert goes, no, that's not it. What you're supposed to be converting souls to Christ. I said, no, I'm supposed to be doing exactly what I am doing. I am trying to defend the constitutional rights of everyone, whether they're a believer or not. And while Gohmert was given this speech, there were at least two people. The chairman at the time was Jerry Nadler, a Democrat, and there was a fellow, Congressman Johnson from Georgia, who was a Buddhist. And so they had to sit there, presumably not just in that one interchange, and listen to Louis Gohmert tell them they were both going to hell. I went up to Louis Gohmert afterwards. I said, you know, I think I concluded the comments by saying, you know, Congressman, my view of heaven and your view of heaven, this is not appropriate commentary for a congressional hearing. So I went up to him afterwards and I said, you know, if you really want to talk about these deep theological issues, why don't we share a meal together? Gohmert looks at his staff guy next to him and goes, arrange for that a breakfast. That was 5 years ago. I'm still waiting for the invitation, which I'm sure got lost in the mail, as it was, you know, corrupted by the people who.
Now
Trump
that he's
was trying to
retired,
elect.
he might give you a call.
He could, and I'd still see him. I did have one other interesting luncheon conversation with a very hard right congressman from Oklahoma. We had a debate out in his home district for some, I think, a social studies convention that happened to be occurring there. And so we go to the airport. He says, Barry, are you on such and such a flight? I said, yeah, I'm on that flight. He said, I'm on the same flight. Let's have lunch. I said, good. I said, let's do that. So halfway through the lunch, he says, you want to hear a joke? I said, sure. Because, I mean, sometimes conservatives actually have a sense of humor, although my general sense is that they really don't, unless they're punching down to hurt somebody. I said, sure. What's the joke? He said, well, the Republican caucus got together and we were trying to figure out what to do with the Y2K problem. This is, of course, the idea that all the computers wouldn't recognize when we actually changed into the new century. And he said, yeah, we decided it would flip back to 1900 and we'd all like it better that way. So, you know, I said, that's not a bad joke. You know, I've told it many times since, including right now.
Well, and I don't know. I think that we need to go further back than 1900 to satisfy them.
I think they would. I mean, they clearly would. And I just saw an interview by on CNN with the man who's now running as a third party candidate. It's not clear to me whether he's on the Peace and Freedom Party or on the Green Party, but he was talking about going after Trump voters. And it's one thing to tolerate Trump voters. It's another thing to actually believe that you're going to convert them to becoming a progressive thinker. And it might be better to build up third parties instead of trying to go after people and demonstrate that a third party like the Green Party has electoral strength at the local and state level before you go after some character who voted for Trump twice. But, that's everybody runs, and they can run for whatever they want, and they can make any argument they want.
Well, weren't there at least I forget what the percentage was, but wasn't there a certain percent of Bernie Sanders supporters who then converted to Trump?
Yeah, that is true. But I mean, it's a very small percentage. I mean, it's kind of like the people who argue that Ralph Nader caused the defeat of Al Gore.
Right.
Al Gore caused the defeat of Al Gore. Ralph Nader did not. Ralph Nader brought a lot of new people into the voting booths, and they voted for lots of Democrats, and maybe they did vote for him. But I don't know if you know Ralph, but he's an incredibly brilliant person.
Oh,
I mean, if you ask him a question, I remember asking him a question about immigration once when I was doing radio. And I said, look, reframe this, he gave 10 reframing items for people to think about immigration. I had thought of 2 of them. He thought of the other 8, and they're all solid ideas. We don't have a media in this country that takes looking at issues seriously. Every time CNN does a new special, with all due respect to the Bee Gees, I own a lot of music. I don't own a single Bee Gees record, tape, cassette, converted anything. But an hour special on the Bee Gees instead of an hour discussing, well, the things I learned in the very first book. I write a lot about military policy. I don't think the average person has the foggiest idea how many people are under arms in the United States, what the commitment is. I hate conscription. I hate the draft. I worked very hard for an amnesty for Vietnam War resistors, because if your government tells you you owe them something, it's your life, and worse, we may ask you to kill people you don't even know. That is as bad. That's the second worst invention in American history after chattel slavery.
Yes.
So, but if we don't talk about these issues, if we don't talk about it, I do listen to Fox News for 15 minutes a day just to get my fix and, anger fixed. Sean Hannity the other night was doing a lengthy monologue about every reason why Trump should not have been indicted. I think that it would be wonderful if there was somebody who would play that the next night and rebut. I'm sure it was 95% inaccurate, but we don't do that. You look at MSNBC, and aside from the fact that they, hire people who by no stretch of the imagination could be considered progressive people, but all they do is to promote other left-wing ideas instead of rebutting the right-wing ideas that are taking ground. They're easy to understand. They're easy to put on a bumper sticker, and nobody rebuts them in real time. And there are people more than capable of doing that, but they are people who rarely are seen on television, rarely seen. Yeah. And that's a huge problem, because if you have not just the Wall Street Journal, the Drudge Report, Fox News, Newsmax, all those obviously right-wing groups and outlets, but then it infects everything else that is going on. It infects the dialogue about all of these issues that we need to reframe and get serious about so that we can make big changes, if not in our lifetimes, in the lifetimes of our kids.
Well, let me ask you about that, because one of the things that I wasn't expecting when I dove into your books was how depressing and scary it was also going to be, because so much of your life's work we're seeing under attack right now again. It's almost as though we're going through an exact repeat.
Yes. And I think about that a lot. And I think my colleagues, people that I worked with at the American Civil Liberties Union on civil rights, on AIDS, on a whole lot of other issues, when we occasionally get together, you look and you say, I thought we fixed this, right. And we didn't. And the irony is the differences, for example, in censorship that you talked about in your monologue. There was a different kind of stream of things that were under attack back in the 80s and 90s. But the intensity of those attacks is just as great. And now, of course, it's focused mainly on race and sexuality. It used to be dirty pictures and the occult. I mean, you'd be amazed at how many attacks there were based on something. I read to our grandkids from a book called Charlotte's Web. Charlotte's Web is a well-known children's book about the friendship between a pig and a spider. That was uniformly attacked back in the late 70s for promoting the idea that animals could speak. They don't speak in the Bible. And don't tell me, oh, wait, it's the snake. No, that's the snake spoke. That was Satan masquerading as a snake. There are no talking animals. So if animals talk in a children's book, you shouldn't expose your children to that book. The very last time I was invited onto the Fox News channel, where I used to kind of live as one with Ellie Smeal and Robert Reich, I think we're the only three progressives that ever could deal with them. But they called me one day and they said they wanted me to come on a Saturday morning at 6:30 in the morning. That is not my prime time, to debate a guy who had just written a new cartoon series. And I said, a cartoons, what's he doing? He has a cartoon series called Veggie Tales. And I knew this because I had a relative who, for a while, was kind of in the right wing of Christianity. And they're vegetables that act out Bible stories. And I said, well, what's his point? Well, why do you want me on? And he said, well, because our guest believes that if you, as a parent, allow your child to watch any cartoon other than Veggie Tales, you are sending that children into an atheist hell. An atheist hell. My God, that's terrible. Atheist hell. But then I thought seriously. I tried to get somebody else, a young woman in our office, because you got to learn how to be on television. You really do. And I like to give people an opportunity to do that whenever I was running some organization. And they wouldn't take her. And so we have gone from the 70s, when you can't have talking animals, to the 2015s, when you're talking vegetables. So somehow there's been a magnificent theological change here. I missed it. I missed the fact that you couldn't allow spiders to talk, but you could allow carrots to talk. I mean, but if you ever, people always say, but can't you use the Bible against the Bible thumpers? And I said, yes, you can do that, but it's pointless, because no matter what you say, they'll come up with something else. And my good friend John Fugelsang is on Sirius. I do a show every month or so. And but you can't, he tries. He's a much more of a Bible scholar than most of the Christian theologians. But if you say, for example, the books, the Levitical codes, the ones that say you can't eat shellfish, you can't eat pork, you can't wear clothing of mixed fabric, that has all been changed by the words of Jesus. The right-wing Christian will say, that's not true. And you go, what do you mean? And then they'll quote from one of the Gospels where Jesus allegedly says, I have come not to change one word of the law. Yeah. Yeah, I had the misfortune of the very first co-host I had on radio was a guy named John Lofton, who died a few years ago, but he was a Christian Reconstructionist. He was a person who would tell you that he believes that every one of the Levitical codes needs to be part of the civil or criminal law of the United States. And to his credit, he didn't have much, but he actually did that. He never ate shellfish. He never wore cotton and wool. He just didn't. He lived the life of a Christian Reconstructionist. So I give him a little credit for that. But the idea that you would take these biblical laws and turn them into the laws of and if you said, oh, John, death penalty, thou shalt not kill. No, that's not what it means. They always have an answer. And it may be a stupid answer, or it may be a semi-thoughtful answer, but you can't use those arguments. A very important gay rights activist wanted to meet with me, and he had this idea, and he could only meet at like 7 o'clock in the morning. I was in St. Louis. I flew back really early. He said, I think what we need to do is train members of Congress to quote the Bible. I said, what? And he said, yes, we have to be able to fight the Bible battle, right on the floors of Congress. I said, I don't think that's a good idea. This is not a country built on the Bible or the Quran or anything else or the statement of humanist principles. This is one that is based on the Constitution and, what's most important, the values behind what the Constitution stands for. Because, as you know, and as you just said in the monologue, these determinations can change. And I do think that people really do need to think hard about what in the world, what are we going to take to the courts? We need to expand the United States Supreme Court. The idea that you add 4 or 5 more people, and even 3-4 years ago, some of the most progressive people I would talk to, lawyers and non-lawyers, would say, oh, we can't do that because if we add 4, then the Republicans will get in, and then they add another 4. That's not the point. We have to save and we have to preserve against these liars that are sitting on the Supreme Court. Every one of them lied about every possible thing of great significance, or we would still have Roe versus Wade. And that cretinous character, Judge Thomas, had the audacity to say during his confirmation hearings that he hadn't really thought about Roe versus Wade. How can you not think about it? He's supposed to be a genius. You talk to all the right wingers. Oh, he's such a bright guy. You cannot be a bright guy and be wrong every time. You cannot do that. You absolutely cannot. So when I was doing radio when Robert Bork was being considered for the Supreme Court, luckily he was defeated. But people would start their criticism with, Robert Bork is a very brilliant man. No, he's not a very brilliant man. You cannot be a brilliant man and have the idiotic ideas that Robert Bork would have brought to the Supreme Court, and which these 3 incompetents named by Donald Trump have brought to the court. They bring nothing. They bring nothing to the court. I mean, these are guys. I remember John Roberts. We often had college students or people that were doing internships in Washington stay with us in our house, and we had a woman who stayed there for about a year, and we never charge them or anything. But she offered to take some of my videotapes of television shows and run through them and watch them. And one day I came back home and she said, hey, did you know you were on TV with John Roberts once? And I said, no, I didn't even remember it. And he said, yeah, it's some obscure CNN show, but he comes out strongly in favor of school vouchers, which he did. And then I watched it, and sure enough, there he was. So the idea that we don't have preconceived ideas, it's preposterous. Every time there would be someone nominated when I was at Americans United for separation of church and state, the Democrats would go, well, give us some questions so we can ask them. Well, if you ask the question, I used to do Bill O'Reilly's show a lot. And if you ask this question, Mr. So-and-so, can you separate your personal religious beliefs from your duties as a Supreme Court justice? And they would all say, surprisingly, oh, yes. And then I'd be on O'Reilly, go, that question shouldn't have been asked. We're not supposed to have religious tests for public office. That's true. But it doesn't mean you can't ask a question like, whatever your beliefs are, can you subsume them to the demands of the Constitution itself? That is not a bigoted question. That is an essential question. And of course, we now know that people don't give honest answers to that question because they can't.
Well, what I don't understand is these people on the right, they claim to love America and understand how it was its principles, but yet they want to ultimately change it into a theocracy. I mean, how do they not make the connection that the rights that they're trying to take away from people mean that they're taking away their own rights? They just don't maybe not right immediately, but those rights are going to be at risk nonetheless.
Yeah, I think, first of all, they don't think that far in advance in general. Although, in a minute, I'd like to explain why I think the left has made some very big mistakes that the right has learned to do right correctly. But I think they view this as a war between good and evil. They know they're good. They will always be good. And the evil people need to be stopped now, and they need to be put into their grave. I used to say that that when you talk about creating compromises with right-wingers, usually the only compromise they want is they want to dig a big hole and then throw the progressives into it and bury us. They're not interested in compromise. There are very few actual compromises that I ever signed on to that were good, that were what I call creative compromises instead of the standard ones, or they're idiot compromises. It's very easy for people in Congress to go, well, we can't agree. Let's have a study that will go on for the next 4 years, and then we'll think about it on the basis of whatever it comes up with. Or, well, if it should be $1 billion, we'll cut it in half of 500 million, and then we'll do that. The only creative compromise, there was something after the school prayer amendment failed to reach Ronald Reagan's desk, which is the closest it came. Some guys, Democrats and Republicans, came up with something called the Equal Access Act. And the Equal Access Act said that if you were a Christian student or a religious student, you could have time off during non-instructional period to have your clubs meet for the purpose of Bible study, Quranic study. And I said, this is, first of all, it's based on a false premise. Students in high schools do not have free speech rights. They did not at the time. And even today, maybe they don't. But the idea that the only people who are not being allowed to form clubs in school were Christian students was ludicrous. And so I talked to the head of the ACLU where I was working at the time, and I said, what if we just turned this into a student free speech bill? What if we just said students could get together in non-instructional time to talk about anything? And he said, man, that would have been great if that had existed during the Vietnam War, because high school students could have gotten together and organized. And so there's a very important, in some ways, he was the greatest senator I ever worked with, Senator Lowell Weicker. He started out as a Republican from Connecticut. And then he became an independent, ran for governor, won. He was the independent governor of Connecticut for a while. And we were talking about this bill, and he comes in. I was sitting with his chief of staff. Lowell comes in and goes, Barry, we're going to take a little trip. I said, what trip? He said, you and I, and he pointed to his staff guy, we're going to go visit Mark Hatfield, because Hatfield, who was in general a very good Republican, except on abortion, where he fell off the deep end. And I had worked with him on a lot of anti-war stuff. So we all sit down. They're having a debate over this so-called equal access bill right on the floor of the Senate while the five of us are sitting around. And Lowell Weicker says to Hatfield, why can't we just guarantee a right to every student to form clubs? We'll put a couple of protections in. They can't have the same person come in every week and be a chaplain. And Hatfield goes, I'm in favor of free speech. Let's do it. Let's just change it. And that's what they did. And they did pass it. And that's why for a while in the 80s and 90s, there were so many gay straight student alliances in high schools all over this country, because that bill is what provided them the guarantee that they could meet. And there were anti-war, once we get into Iraq and Afghanistan, other student groups were meeting in high schools to discuss peace initiatives and what they could do about it. The environment, the same thing. All of these. And yes, the Christian students were meeting. They had been meeting. I knew the Supreme Court was going to guarantee them the right to meet.
Right.
So you ought to find something. And that was a what I call a creative compromise. It did more good than harm, and the harm was coming via the courts anyway.
Yeah. You had said earlier that you wanted to talk about where the left had erred and what the Republicans have learned from the left.
Yeah. Well, the first thing that the left doesn't do, they don't stay long enough. And I mean that literally. If you're in a meeting, a political meeting in your town, the radical right-wingers will stay forever. They will stay until the last breath any of them has. But my experience is that people on the left, they tend to go home early. We got to go. Well, you got to go, but then the other side wins by default. You have to play the long game. This is why this is an example. I mentioned Oliver North. I did radio with him for years, every Friday afternoon. And he and I did this radio show. I also did a radio show at the time with a woman named Michelle Laxalt, who was the daughter of Paul Laxalt, who had been Ronald Reagan's campaign manager and a long-time Nevada senator. And so one day, that show we did every afternoon. And one day he said, my dad, Paul, love to have you and Ollie come in and have lunch. He's a lobbying law firm now. I said, sure, that'd be fun. And then he said, oh, and we have the former head of the Rules Committee in the House. He's just joined the firm. He'd like to sit in too. So I said, that's great. So we get there, and I admit I'm a little late because there was some kind of accident between my office and Paul Laxalt's lobbying firm. So I get there. I'm a few minutes late. I walk in the door. North says, great, we invite one liberal to lunch, and he's late. And I looked at these people. I said, if I had walked into this room just a couple of years ago and saw all of you sitting here, I'd say, what war are you planning to start this afternoon? But Laxalt said, Barry, we're not going to make the mistake we made in the first term, the Reagan first term. We are going to make sure that the courts are filled with conservatives, and it was like pulling teeth to get Democrats to as aggressively focus on that. And this is why it's not just the Supreme Court. It is the federal system in general, starting, with, as we look forward to the trial of Donald Trump in Florida. I mean, the trial judge is a totally inexperienced person who has given Trump the benefit of the doubt in previous rulings that have been overturned by a very conservative Court of Appeals, the 11th Court of Appeals, very conservative. And, this has infected the entire judiciary. A lot of people go, well, you can always, when the Supreme Court was good or better than it is now, well, you can always go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court takes 2% of the cases that are appealed to it. The other 98% are decided generally by those federal appeals courts. And those have been overwhelmingly poisoned by Trump and Bush appointees. So it is a big issue. And if we don't get serious about changing it, we are going to keep losing, which raises the question, what should liberals, progressives, actual constitutionalists do about filing new lawsuits. And it is a very tough thing. And I'm not running an organization now. So I don't have to think about this as much. If you're in a gun control organization, what cases do you want to take to this Supreme Court about regulation of guns? Because there was just a decision that got almost as much attention as the overturning of Roe versus Wade last term. The state of New York says if you want a concealed carry permit for your gun, you have to explain to some magistrate why you want it. If that violates the Second Amendment, so that in the city of New York, you can now, with very few exceptions, you can conceal carry without explaining why you need it. If that violates the Second Amendment, then what doesn't violate the Second Amendment? If I were in a gun control organization for which I get like 15 emails a day from various ones, I'd think the better part of valor on that issue is just don't go to court at all. Build up other defenses against this incredible, at some book party a couple of weeks ago, somebody said, is there any issue you couldn't work on? And I said, I believe you should maintain a sense of humor. And there is nothing funny about what's happening in the gun violence in this country. And I could not work on that issue. And then, although I cannot remember it, Wanda Sykes in her latest comedy special did come up with something funny to say about AK-47s. So check it out. It was funny, but I don't remember jokes. And the other thing is, there's nothing wrong with playing this long game, with thinking about what effect this is going to have, not just on you, but on your kids, or in my case, I've got 3 grandchildren. What is it going to be like? What are we going to build up that will be sustainable and then will grow in next generations? Because this generation, I don't know how old you are, but I mean, the generation of which I am a part, we thought we had solved every problem, and we really didn't. And we have to fight these things. Eleanor Roosevelt told the very first person who ran Americans United for separation of church and state, my long predecessor, he was alive when I took over, but living in a retirement home. She said to him once, we are going to have to fight the fight for separation of church and state in every generation that follows. Every generation that follows. And of course, she's right.
Yeah.
The right is looking for ways, now that they've really done incredible damage to the idea that private schools have to be funded privately. Now they're looking for a creationism case to take so that they can reverse the 2 major decisions by the Supreme Court in the past, both from Louisiana, that said you can't prohibit the teaching of evolution. You can't give equal time to creationism and evolution. But I think that some of the members of the court are just, they're barely competent. I mean, I spent a lot of time in Washington, and I could give you the names of 100 lawyers who are conservative and no better and no worse than Brett Kavanaugh. But they fought to keep him. And I know people are going to say, well, wait a minute, every once in a while they do something good, like they didn't completely gut the Voting Rights Act earlier this month. And that's true. And, today they've decided a case that looks like it benefits Native American, Alaskan Native Americans. I don't think they care. What do they care? There's one case it's still pending over the rights of a mail delivery person to refuse to fill in on Sundays to do mail delivery because he said the Sabbath is made for God. And so quite seemed reasonable to me. The Postal Service said, well, no, you can go to church, but in the afternoons. No, no, no. The whole day is God. Not just till noon, the whole day. And if he doesn't prevail, it will be a demonstration, to my way of thinking, that corporations win even if they're fighting a religious person or even a Christian person. So it's had nothing to do with their general trend of helping. They've got another case at the Supreme Court, a woman who has refused to make a website for any GLBT folks getting married. No one's asked her to. No one's asked her to. And this is normally what we would call an advisory opinion, which courts are not supposed to give. But they took this case and they're going to decide it, in my judgment, improperly on the merits in the next few weeks. And they're going to say, you know, she does have the right. She's an artist and she has a right to decide what she's going to do. But it's an advisory opinion. Nobody even came to her to ask. This is not like the Baker's case, a guy who ran something called Masterpiece Bakery.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, he went to court. They did ask him, gay couple did ask him to provide a cake. He said he wouldn't do it. And the Supreme Court decided that case in the baker's favor, but not because of any profound constitutional position, but they said that the Colorado Human Rights Commission had said some things in ruling against the baker that demonstrated an animus, an hostility to religion. And one commissioner had said, you know, we can't allow this religious claim to subsume the law because people have been using religion throughout our history to justify all kinds of discrimination. Now that's true. That isn't, no question about it. Back in the 50s, when I was growing up, there were people preaching on radio that segregation was the only permissible way to deal with the races, because it says in the book of Genesis that God separated the light from the darkness. What? You know, that was in the 50s. They were still making that argument. So the idea that we never used religion to justify discrimination, that's somehow an animus against religion instead of a statement of fact, is just a preposterous position. Preposterous position.
But, you know, yeah. And that's what really gets scary is when you look at some of the, well, here, let me ask you this. I mean,
yeah,
as you said, the entire court system at this point is been thoroughly corrupted. And again, Republicans have been doing this quite openly for decades, and Democrats have allowed them to do it. I mean, in one case, I think it was Chuck Schumer made a deal to accelerate, you know, not Supreme Court justice seats, but the federal judiciary to accelerate.
Absolutely.
And given where we are with the court system, how the hell do we even get out of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I mean, the first thing is the ultimate decider, the Supreme Court. It's got to be expanded. And I would say collateral to that, because we know there are Democrats like Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin who aren't really Democrats. We need to get voting representation for the District of Columbia. There have to be 2 senators because they will be liberals. There's no question about it. And we should stop with this nonsense that says, oh, we don't want to look into the record of Democrats and they should be a tabula rasa. They shouldn't be. We've already seen the damage that does. We need to make sure that these are progressive thinkers and not 50-year-olds, but 40-year-olds who will get on the court and stay there for 40 years.
Yeah. How likely is that to happen, though?
Well, I mean, what needs to happen to expand the number of senators by 2 is simply to have a Senate and a House that will vote to grant voting rights to the District of Columbia. I lived there for a long time. There were 750,000 of us that never had any real voting right. I come up to Massachusetts, where I am now, and I gained proximity to 3 grandkids, 2 United States senators, and a backyard. So, it's a trifecta of reasons to get out of DC. But I think that is doable. And I think it needs to be a high priority of anyone who claims to be a progressive running in the next election. Because we don't need more Joe Manchins. We don't need Kirsten Sinemas. We don't need those people demonstrating that they are not, on a daily basis, that they are not real progressives. We should have a litmus test for progressives. I mean, one of the things I worked on for a long time in my early career in Washington was is a phenomenon that nobody even talks about. It is discharges from the military during Vietnam were given to hundreds of thousands of people. And what would happen is this: commanding officer would go, sees somebody's smoking a joint. He'd go, we could court-martial you for that, you drug user. Or we could just muster you out. It'll take a couple days. Now, you will get something called an undesirable discharge, but, it's better than being court-martialed. And these guys would go, yeah, I don't want to be court-martialed. Then to get this thing called an undesirable discharge, and it would make them unemployable. Because think about this. If you are going for a job, and they to this day, they still ask, were you in the military? What was your discharge? If you can't say I was discharged under honorable conditions, it's undesirable. You ain't going to get that job. You're just not going to get that job. And you're not going to get any VA benefits either. So you are shafted in 2 ways. You won't be able to find a job. And if you do find a job and you need real health care, you can't go to the Veterans Administration hospitals. Nobody has talked about that since the Vietnam War was over. And this was another interesting compromise that I worked on with Ed Brooke, who was the first and only African-American senator from Massachusetts, and Jim Abourezk, who was the most liberal guy, pro-Palestinian from South Dakota. The 2 of them got into this issue. I used to talk to them every day. We'd vote count every day. They finally, and I remember Jim Abourezk talks to me once. He said, have we gotten just about everything we can get from negotiating? I said, I think we have. And he said, well, where are you going to be tomorrow? I said, I'm going to be in Ocean City, New Jersey. I'm going on vacation. He said, give me your phone number. They didn't even have cell phones at that time. I gave him the phone number. Phone rings. We get into the hotel, and it's Jim. And Jim says, hey, look, I think we got everything we want. And so what we did the last 2 days, we didn't put a hold on the bill, but you used to be able to do this. If there used to be courtesy of senators, where if you wanted to buy a little time, you would go and put a hold in the bill. You'd go to the president of the Senate, and so Abourezk could put a hold on one day, and Ed Brooke would put it on the next day, and then they'd change off. So he said, well, Ed and I took our holds off the bill this morning, and Bob Dole thought maybe there's something suspicious going on. He put a hole in his own bill, as the big defense spending bill. And I said, well, what did he want? And he said he just wanted to make sure that this proposal was going to affect everybody, including World War II and Korean veterans, that make it easier for them to appeal their undesirable discharges. And Jim says, I didn't think you'd be against that. I said, no, of course not. This has been going on forever. But nobody ever talks about it. And my friends who have spent their life in military law, in and out of the service, says the system's getting much worse again. But nobody ever speaks about it. We are about to ban the use of TikTok for the two worst reasons. One, and I talk a lot about this in the book, the so-called porn book, about all the things we try to censor. The two arguments we try to use the most are, it'll be bad for children, and so it'll hurt national security. Those are the two bound together that are being used to try to ban TikTok. I'm not on TikTok. I'm signing up for TikTok as soon as they pass that. And I have not been able to get even our allegedly progressive Senator Elizabeth Warren to even answer the question, or her staff to answer the question, what is she going to do about the ban on TikTok? No progressive should ban TikTok, in my view. No progressive. You should find other ways to deal with China if you feel that they're the enemy, but you cannot ban TikTok. And you've got to find ways to deal with the fact that children might see, I don't know what they're going to see. Maybe they're going to see somebody. I guess the argument is they're going to see somebody whose body image is better than their own, and this will cause them deep. Yeah, well, there are plenty of ways you can deal with that other than banning the depictions in the first place. Every single thing that people want to ban. And I did, and this is something that a lot of people, find disturbing, but I defended the right of advertisers to advertise everything: alcohol, condoms, and even tobacco. I hate tobacco. I hate smoking. I spent years just trying to get the local governments in Virginia to ban smoking in restaurants. We won that. If you don't like smoking, don't tell tobacco advertisers, as one proposal did, you can only advertise using letters, black letters on a white piece of paper. That's not, you can't do that. If you don't want people to smoke, then you go in and you change the law and you make sure that tobacco products are in fact not legally sold in America. If you don't know that,
you upset your father-in-law over that position.
My father-in-law, I just upset him by merely getting married to his daughter. Yeah, but I mean, he called me one day. He said, Barry, I don't agree with a lot of what you do, but this is an outrage. You're on the front page of the New York Times. I said, what am I saying? He said, saying you will go to defending the rights of tobacco producers and cigarette companies to sell cigarettes through advertising. My favorite story of that whole period was going down to Kentucky, to the Kentucky Tobacco Farmers Association annual meeting. And so I got there, and I walked up on the stage. I had a copy of Playboy magazine, and I said to the crowd, and there were a lot of children and the wives of the male tobacco farmers there, and I said, I'm here to talk about censorship, like this. And I pulled out the Playboy magazine, and I opened it, not to the centerfold, but to a giant cardboard cutout of the character Joe Camel, this big snouted thing that sold Camel cigarettes, and it popped out. And everybody breathed a sigh of relief. But, it's a little bit, you cannot lose your sense of humor on all of this. I mean, I was you mentioned a sometime comedian. If people go to my website, it's barrywlynn.com, and it there's something I did because a couple of months after I got out of a long set of hospital stays after I retired, and Lewis Black had asked me to say something at the end of his show, and I said, Lewis, I said, I can hardly talk. I mean, I had lost my voice. I can hardly speak. He said, just whisper it if you have to. I did a little better than that, but there is a video of that close to the front of barrywlynn.com. And it was, that's another thing. These breakthrough moments, when someone does you, I talked about it, somebody does you a favor, never forget that. Never forget it. And if it's a big favor, like I considered that to be, you really, you need to never forget it, because it is the kind of gift that you can be given at times that make all the difference in the world. You were talking earlier about, in your monologue, about the butterfly effect, which, as you know from the book, I learned about the butterfly effect by watching the Outer Limits television show. And one of the openings for that show, one episode was, if you move the position of a single pebble on a beach, you change the course of history. And early in the book, of course, I talk about these 5 events that happened early in my life, all of which were such important events. But for them, I probably would never have had the opportunities, the privilege of working for all these causes with all these wonderful people throughout the years of my life. So I think everybody, when they get to 70 or so, think back, what are the things and who are the people that made the most difference? Who are the people who gave you that one little nudge, that one opportunity that you might not have had? And thank them if they're still with us. Thank them.
Yeah. Yeah, we do lose sight of that, especially in dark times. We don't, and which is one of the reasons why, again, I wanted to have you on, because to me, you're one of the people that have done all of us a huge favor. I mean, you dedicated your life to this, and that's not a small measure. I mean, this was a lot. This ate up a lot of your life. I mean, time away from your wife, time away from, other things.
Yeah, it did. But, I didn't really think of it that way, because I thought, I, although I don't compare myself to Senator Philip Hart of Michigan, who was probably the greatest senator the Democratic Party ever had, but I had testified about amnesty for Vietnam War resistors, and my wife, who is a doctor and a very busy person, but she didn't usually go to these congressional hearings, but she went to that one. And afterwards, she and I walk up to Phil Hart, and Phil says, that was great testimony. Joanne says to him, how is it that you're able to work on this, such a controversial issue, abortion, such a controversial issue, and you do it all at the same time? And his answer was, because sometimes you just have to do what is right. I don't think there's a single senator that would make that statement and that it would come from his heart. I don't think his or her heart. I just don't believe it. But that was a profound statement. He had cancer. He died a few months later. But that was his life. It was to be the conscience of the Senate, because some things he had to do just because it was the best, the right, the proper thing to do as a moral matter, to say nothing of a constitutional one.
Well, geez, I don't have a lot of positive things to say about members of Congress at all at this point. I'm very disillusioned by it. And I'm disappointed in the progressives too. I don't feel as though that they fought hard enough. I don't think that they've made the best of decisions, and that worries me going into this next election, because I think people underestimate Trump, and I also think they underestimate Ron DeSantis should he get the nomination, because I think in many ways he's more dangerous than Trump.
Yeah, I do agree with you that he's more dangerous than Trump. I do think that, well, the Democratic Party may face Trump again. And I don't think that would be an entirely bad thing, frankly, because when you look at the conduct of this man, whatever happens in this trial, which somebody wrote me a note and said today and said, well, that judge will just acquit him. Well, it's not that easy. She can give a lot of terrible rulings that will allow in or out evidence against Trump, but it will drag on. And one does have to worry in any jury trial about the ringer, the one person who's going to go, yeah, I've looked at all this and I think that guy Jim Jordan was right. They've weaponized the Justice Department, and I'm not, because that kind of rhetoric is going to get into the trial. But then the Justice Department, if it's a hung jury, even if it's an 11-1 jury, are they going to prosecute him again? They should. This is an evil man. This is a man who is not just wrong-headed or foolish or ideological. He is an evil person. In the last election cycle, much as I had troubles with Joe Biden, I don't think you could allow evil to prevail, not for another term. The damage is too great. One of the other things that I think those of us who are progressives and pretty far on the left, every time we make a decision about who we're voting for, we're going to be fine, you and I, and the people that live close. But there's a lot of people, whether they're on the border or whether they're sick in a hospital in Queens, they ain't going to be right. We have to always balance the dangers that are voting for somebody else. And I voted for Shirley Chisholm for president in the 1968 election, because she was a champion. She was on the Peace and Freedom Party, it was called at the time. And I really didn't see a difference. You got Nixon, you have Humphrey. Does it make any difference? And it probably didn't, or at least I convinced myself it didn't. But with the exception of, I think this country needs a third party, and I don't know how we get there. And I don't think I don't even understand Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I don't understand what he stands for, what his kind of crazy ideas about vaccines and other things. But it's tough. I think we really need to make a judgment about how important it is to build a third party versus how it is to make sure that people who are in far worse positions than ourselves, how do we protect them from the evil that will come if we don't hold our nose and vote for people who aren't that good either. It's tough.
No, I struggle with that. I really do. I mean, Joe Biden is unfathomable to me. That man, and I also, my feeling is, and I might be wrong, but my feeling also is part of the threat of Donald Trump didn't just sort of manifest from nothing. That came from decades of neoliberalism and the very policies that hurt the vulnerable people, hurt workers.
Sure.
And it seems as though the Democratic Party has not, well, I think that they've they've learned from it. They just don't seem to care
Right.
because they seem to continue on this neoliberal track record. I mean, if Joe Biden could have. I mean, it drives me crazy when people describe him, most progressive president ever, as though that's some sort of a milestone at this point. Like oh wow, well, okay, but he's not remotely been progressive. I mean, to defeat Trump, you need to go at the heart of what is hurting people, which is a socioeconomic inequality
Sure.
and that harm. And Democrats just don't seem willing to do that. I don't know if it's because of their corporate donors or, I mean, you mentioned Joe Manchin earlier. How much of Joe Manchin is more just him being a scapegoat for what the Democratic Party kind of wants anyhow?
Yeah, I think that's true. Although, I mean, I don't see a way that Joe Manchin will be reelected. He's now 21 points behind a very popular Republican governor named Justice.
Right.
And what happens in Arizona, too, I don't know. Here was a woman who was the first openly bisexual person to run for the Senate and be elected. And she turns out to be a travesty, a person who's interested only in the pharmaceutical industry and hedge funds. And I guess, I mean, it just goes to show you, I guess, everybody in the LGBTQ plus community isn't progressive, but she's in a hell of a position to do damage, and she clearly has done it. I don't know what the fact that one of the other liberal things we ought to do for sure is we got to stop this idiotic debt ceiling thing, because this I mean, this is, and for, inflation is down by a tiny fraction, this month over the last few months. Why don't Democrats say, by the way, inflation's caused mainly by corporate greed? It's not because of a supply chain problem. There was an advertisement. I got this old car, and we keep thinking maybe it's on its last legs. Who can afford a new car? And you go to you watch the television ads and they go, we're having a interest at 1.9%, $500 off. Did you ever buy a car and just go, oh, here's the list price, I think I'll pay $500 less? Hell no. You go in, you start negotiating at 20% off, because they're crooks, because they're selling you cars that aren't even very good, and they're selling you those cars and hoping you're foolish enough. I was buying a car about 10 years ago, and there was a Hispanic family, and the guy was trying to tell him that if $200 off the list price was a good deal. And I not normally do this, but I just said, sir, this guy is not telling you the truth. You can get a lot better deal than $200 off this brand new car. They raise the prices of cars. Now they come back and say, we'll cut a few $100s off. Please buy a car from us. The pharmaceutical industry. I want to tell you a story about the pharmaceutical. When I had left the ACLU, we were moving to New Hampshire, presumably because of Dartmouth Medical School. I was supposed to have some job up there. My wife did have a real job, and I didn't have I had no job, and so the pharmaceutical people would, every once in a while, they would say, hey, if you come to a breakfast, talk about the First Amendment rights of advertisers, and we'll give you $500. And I remember one so vividly. I was there, and there were probably 400 people in the audience. And the guy that introduced me, I sat down. He said, if we could get Barry to join the pharmaceutical industry, we'd have to pay him $1 million. And it wasn't bullshit. I mean, I was really good at articulating these reasons, what the First Amendment meant, and why, whether you like it or not, it covers you people. That's what they're paying. There's a ballot measure in Los Angeles that says if you were the corporate head of a healthcare system, these private healthcare systems, your salary would be capped at the salary of the president of the United States. And there's litigation to keep it off the ballot. But it'd be a good first step. I mean, corporate America is, they're abusive. They're being paid not to piss people off, although they do that too, but just to make sure that this country never really grows up. That's just the truth. And but anyway, that's not in the book. I have to write a new book about that. But
I hope you will.
yeah, I don't know. It's it's hard to. I used to travel a lot, and I used to travel, and I would take crates of books. These last couple books that you mentioned, and I just sell out right away. I mean, people go, oh yeah, we'll buy your book. But now I don't have that regular set of appearances. I don't travel very many places. And, the podcasts help. The little advertising I do helps. But it's that I'm doing another book party, virtual book party in California in a couple days.
Oh,
And
wow.
I'm sure I'll sell a bunch of books that way. But the publishing industry, I did not realize until this, because I published the first book, that Piety and Politics thing was some imprint of Random House. It's just one of the 4 existing major publishers now. And they gave me a large advance, which they never made back. I don't think they even understood they assigned you a guy to publicize it. This was a guy, I don't remember his name, but he was from Australia. And he, just in case you didn't notice that from his accent, he always wore a tie with kangaroos on it. And I don't think he ever opened the book. I don't think he understood at all what the book was about. And then I said the second one with a humanist press. They did a better job of publicizing. And but these very small presses, I mean, you go in knowing they don't have a huge operation to promote, and you have to do a lot of promotion. And then you find out that all these people who want to help you promote the book are a lot of them are scams. I mean, they really are. And then you get into the big boys, the Amazons of the world. I do not know. I am not entitled to know how many copies in paperback or on Kindle my books have sold through Amazon.
What?
I'm not entitled to know that. And they say, well, just go to your publisher. They don't get told that either. They do not. Amazon, for all that it might be good for writers, they have a self-publishing arm. Maybe they treat them better. I don't know. But these small publishers just do not get treated well by Amazon. And maybe the musicians. I mean, I know you like music, and I mean the stories. I know a lot of musicians, and the stories they tell about music distribution and how much they get from Spotify. I mean, one woman, we were talking about this a couple of years ago, and she said, I got my check from Spotify. I said, what was it for? She said, 3 cents. I said, 3 cents? I said, you sell hundreds, thousands of records. Yeah, but streaming, I get 3 cents. That is not right. That's why the writer's strike is so important.
Yes. Thank you.
The writer's strike is incredibly important. And the actors may go out and the screenwriters may go out. But that's okay, because the corporations that control movies and distribution of music and publishing are just corrupt. And you got to get them out somewhere. I mean, I was tempted to take my two 5-year-old twin granddaughters and sell my book on the street, because they do a good job with lemonade. And so they were raising $8 or something for the last few months so they could get something in the mail, which I guess came today. But sell the book. My daughter, by the way, is the on the cover of the Peace
Oh,
the
it's
Peace book. Yeah, yeah, you can. And I took her to an anti-war rally, and she was widely photographed because of the shirt. Uh, but I took her up on the stage, and I never took her up again because I didn't think it was right. I don't think it's right to use your kids as props. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Look at that. Look what that shirt says. Heck no, I won't go.
Yeah, I did not
So
realize that.
I put her on, and I said to her, I said, Christina, I'm putting you on the cover of my first of the 3 books. And she said, I've always wanted to be a cover model. But yeah, it's tough. And I do like the book. I think it's valuable. I think it's valuable for all the reasons you mentioned. I think it gives hope too. In spite of these setbacks that we're having in the church state arena, the the good news is I don't think we'll ever be able to have a draft again. The combination of granting, imperfect as it was, pardons for war resistors from Vietnam, the difficulty that Congress had in passing, just by a very few votes, registration for the current draft, coupled with the fact that after all of the Sturm and Drang that comes, that I talk about in the book, of how we're going to prosecute. There only were 19 people ever prosecuted for failing to register for the new draft. 19. They were talking about there are millions of people who didn't register, or who did something just as bad, failed to notify the federal government of your change of address. 19 people. 18 of those people wrote to the Department of Justice and said, my name is so-and-so, I'm not registering, come get me. The other person was, I understand, a Laotian refugee who probably didn't even know he had an obligation to register for the draft. He was just a refugee. With this kind of stuff going on, I don't think you can bring it back. The other thing, again, for good or evil, I don't think we'll ever start enforcing obscenity laws in this country. I mean, it's too accessible. People, lots of people use it, they watch it, they see it, they read it. And I think the embarrassing events of the Ed Meese Pornography Commission, which I write about a lot in the book,
You do.
I mean, but it was the strangest year of my life. I mean, I was at the ACLU. I worked very hard to get to be assigned to be the person who would follow them around the country. And we followed them around the country. And they were just silly. I mean, I did, in the book, I mentioned something, I forget who wrote it, but somebody in the Washington Post said that one of the worst things about being on the commission was they'd have to face my ironic wit. And but I used, here's another, you use the weapons of the government against itself. These nitwits, with the exception of the three of the 4 women, actually said, this is ridiculous, this is not valid, we didn't do any research. This thing was a federal advisory commission, which means that there are rules. And one of the rules was, as soon as the members of the commission were mailed any documents, the public had a right to get them also. Now, that's good if you're fighting them. You want to know what they're doing. So I'd walk over, I call him every day. Hey, is it ready? Oh, Barry, yeah, come on, get him. And then I would get it, and then I would give it to Phil Sheenan with the New York Times and Bob Shear with the LA Times, and the people that really were covering this. And I would say, I mean, my favorite example, I guess, was turned into sex toys. They were going to have a national ban on sex toys. So I, I thought this, although there are 2 states that have a ban on sex toys. I forget
Texas.
which ones there are. Which ones?
Well, I believe it's Texas. You can only have so many.
Texas has one, and I think Alabama still has one. But anyway, this is a national ban, and so the headline in the Washington Post the day after I found this out, Porn Commission considering ban on dildos or something like that, and the chairman of the commission had decided that in addition to the rules imposed on him by the Federal Advisory Commission, he did not want any of his board members to speak to the press until the complete finish of the document. Now that was great, because then I could say, yep, they're trying to outlaw dildos. And then they go to the commission and no comment, no comment, no comment. And I thought there was a simultaneous feminist critique of pornography that was serious. I think it had a lot of big conceptual problems, but I also thought that the position of the ACLU that I was defending on the edges of that was indefensible too. I mean, at the time, the ACLU thought that child pornography could be made and distributed at the candy stores, and that was absurd. And I think there is a way to deal with it, that a kind of concept of sexual privacy. People that did not submit to or agree to being in these sexually explicit materials, if you're a child, you can't do that. You can't admit that. You can't concede it. And if you're I knew Catherine McKinnon, who's still, a law professor, I believe, but, she represented the interests of the women in Deep Throat, Linda Lovelace. And that was a fake name, of course. And it was Linda Marciano. And I was convinced, I mean, I heard her testify, and I saw her appear that she was, in fact, coerced into making that film. And there should be a remedy for that. And there are all kinds of privacy interests that are remedied. If they put, Sean, your picture up next to Wonder Bread on a billboard in the state of New York, at least, you have a right to sue them for the use of your image in conjunction with something you don't even like, you don't endorse. It's an implied endorsement. You didn't make it. You're entitled to damages. But when I took that to the ACLU and said, think of it, just compare that to the damage that could be done to a child, and the majority of the board said, not interested. So there are creative things that can be done, and I think in that arena should be done, but I don't think run of the mill, in part because juries, I write in the book about one of the very last trials of somebody at a dirty bookstore in Virginia.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and I mean, this is one where there was so little evidence introduced that one guy from Legal Times did a long piece about the jurors in that case. And he interviewed not all of them, but many of them. And he said, would it have changed your mind if there had been evidence that there were 6 other stores in the same county selling exactly the same materials? And the jurors all go, yeah, we didn't know that. The craziest thing that happened during the Meese Commission period, there was a guy who worked for the Justice Department part of the Regnery Books empire. I forget who he was, but he got embroiled in a dispute with his wife, claimed violence of some kind. And when law enforcement went to the guy's house, they found he had a large amount of pornography. And when he was asked about it, he said, yeah, I have porn, and doesn't everybody? I mean, that's the whole point. I mean, it's whether we like it or hate it, it's just all around. And the imagery, of course, a lot of the images are terrible images. But once you start trying to figure out what images to ban, you're back to what are you going to say? Sex with how many people is permissible and not permissible? I was in these characters from the Meese Commission went to Houston, Texas. They looked at the 3 scuzziest adult stores I can imagine existing at the time. One of them is water running right down the floor of it. Oh. And the third one was the worst. And you went into the store, and the stores had all been advised that there were government officials coming. And you bought tokens. This is probably predates you, but in the old days, you would you go to Times Squares, and you put a quarter or a token in a little slot while standing in a buddy booth where you could have 2 people, maybe 3, and you could all watch a loop. Put in a quarter, you can watch a couple minutes of it. So I'm there with Ellen Levine, who's a wonderful woman who was, at the time, the editor of Woman's Day magazine. Henry Hudson, now sadly a federal judge in Virginia, but had been the chair of the commission, and myself. Somebody put in the token. We're standing there, the 3 of us, looking at this picture, this loop, this photos. Here's what the photos were. 2 men, appear to be gay men, wearing green monster masks, having sex. Henry Hudson looks at me and he says, Barry, when you testified to the commission 8 months ago, you said every one of these images contains an idea. What's the idea here? I said, Henry, try it. You might like it. Now, Ellen was already souring on the thing. She wished she had never been a part of it, but she was trying desperately not to laugh in his face. And she later just objected to their whole nonsensical conclusions. But so you use those forces and those entities in government to do the things that are going to help you sully the government. I learned that from a wonderful activist named Henry Schwarzschild. He had been a civil rights activist in the South, and then moved to New York, worked for the ACLU. And one of the things they tried to do during the efforts before there was a pardon from Jimmy Carter, they created this kind of goofy thing to, if you violated the draft laws, you could earn your way back to the good graces of the country by doing 2 years of community service. And one day, Henry finds out that the Super Bowl people, I think it was CBS at the time, CBS was going to give this earned reentry program a free minute on the Super Bowl. And that was worth a lot of money then. It was worth north of $1 million. So Henry calls the lawyers at CBS and says, we have something called the Fairness Doctrine, and it doesn't require equal time, but it does force local stations to cover all sets, all positions on a given issue of controversy. Your affiliates are going to have a lot of trouble with this, and I suggest you not run them. And CBS said, yep, not running them. And that just burned up everybody, including the chairman of that little commission who was Charles Goodell, former Republican New York senator. But you use these things. You have it. We don't have the fairness doctrine anymore. But when it was there, it was used and should have been used even more to say to corporate advertisers and others, if you say this is a good product, we're going to find people who say, no, it's not. And you're going to have to give them advertising space also. So you use it, you learn the system in order to use it when you can to have it help destroy itself. And that's a lesson. And you can't give up. You can never, ever give up. You just can't.
Well, that brings me to my next question. Would you ever consider politics?
No. When I was doing this, I spent a year and a half doing a show with Pat Buchanan every day. And he asked me, he said, why didn't you ever at least work for a president? And I said, somewhat tongue in cheek, I just never found one that was moral enough for me to work for. But in fact, that was kind of true.
Yeah.
I mean, Jimmy Carter had lots of problems. Barack Obama, I know everybody loves him, but I don't understand, how it took him this long to figure out that marriage equality was a good thing. I mean, come on, please. He's a UCC guy like myself, a United Church of Christ. We ordained the first gay people in the country. But it was never appealing. I always wanted to be on the outside looking in, saying to politicians, you know something, you need to do better than this. And that was better if you were a Democrat, really better if you were a Republican. And I just had no interest in the political, in running for office. I am tempted, though, now that I live in Massachusetts. I'm so antagonistic toward Elizabeth Warren. I just
well, you need to be.
Yeah, I mean, she says you wouldn't take any PAC money. I hate PACs. I do raise money for one PAC because it only functions to give money to local organizations, particularly during the last few weeks of a campaign, to get people to the polls. That's the thing we need to do. Yeah. If you need to hire buses, and this is happening in a couple places, hire buses and pick people up and take them to the polling place. That's what's going to make a difference. But, I just... political action committees are cancer. 527 organizations, another creation of Congress. And if they are a creation of Congress, I think you can make a good job. And some members of Congress have actually introduced legislation to do away with these. I don't even like 501c4 organizations, which it's a charity, but it's not quite a charity, and you can advertise. If you want to elect candidates, have a committee to do that. If you want to do charitable work, do charitable work. Don't mix the two, and don't go through the fiction that PACs and regular campaign people don't coordinate and talk to each other.
Oh, I know.
Because they clearly do. I remember during the last election cycle, somebody was on CNN. He was running a PAC of some kind, and they had just had some official from the organization on, and the host said, well, now I know you can't coordinate and you didn't watch our last segment, but come on, this is ridiculous. I think the ACLU is partially right in saying that there shouldn't be limits on campaigns, but it was always predicated on the idea that there would be public financing of those elections. And I think if they're public financing, I could probably live with, not limiting other contributions, but we're nowhere close. We'll never get to that point.
You don't think we'll ever get to public financing?
I don't think so. And I think that there's one truth of the public financing is if you are an incumbent, you're always going to get more attention, more value than if you're somebody trying to unseat someone.
That's
And
true.
there was an effort actually back in the 70s, back in the 80s, to not allow not allow candidates who are running against someone or the candidate who is being run against to say negative things about their opponent. Why the hell would you run if you didn't have something negative to say? I used to say this to Buchanan too. Why would you not say this guy is the worst person in the world and that's why I'm running against him? Why wouldn't you say that? But no, I don't think Sean, I don't think we'll ever get to public financing, not because of that reason of the entitlement of incumbency, but just because I don't think we have the stomach to do it. I don't think
Well,
politicians will ever self-impose that potential wound on themselves.
well, Mr. Reverend Barry W. Lynn, we've run out of time. I want to talk more about your book. I've only got the one hard copy. I have to admit, I bought the digital versions.
Oh, that's okay.
Not on that,
No.
not on Amazon, but on
Yeah,
Apple.
good. Oh, that's good.
I have to say, I truly enjoyed this book, and I say this book. There's 3 parts to it. There's three different books, and I read them out of order.
Oh, good. So you read prayer first.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then and there was a story. I wanted to really quickly just ask you about this, and I was trying to find it while you were talking, and I can't. Maybe it's in the wrong. I'm in the wrong. No piece. There was a story that you talked about. There was a gentleman who had been dishonorably discharged.
Yeah.
And the FBI came and arrested him early in the morning with his daughter. And that story, to me, I'm getting a little teary because it's just it shows the work that you do is so important and impactful. I mean, this guy ended up living in his car with his daughter after this. Couldn't get a job because of the dishonorable discharge.
Right.
And thanks to you, we're here. Can you just tell that story real quick? Because
I mean, he is one of those people that got an undesirable discharge. They can. He had been to Vietnam twice. He had 2 Purple Hearts. You get a Purple Heart if there's you're a victim of friendly fire. And he tried to go back because they said, you want to re-enlist? Because he hadn't been discharged. He said yes. He went back to the Army base where he was supposed to report. And they said, yeah, sir, we have no record that you've ever been in the military. He goes, no, I've been in the mill. I was in Vietnam twice. And they say, go away. And then they sent him away time and time again. He gave up. Many months later, he's in his house. He finally has a house. He'd been living in a car. Gets in his house. He's taking his little daughter to church. Knock on the door. It's the FBI. Are you so-and-so? He says, yes. They said, well, you're under arrest for desertion from the United States military. He calls me up because I guess he'd seen me on television, and I didn't, I worked on that generic fix for the discharge system, but I didn't do a lot of individual cases. And he told his story, and it was just so compelling. And I said, well, let me see what you've got, the records, and we'll go to the Pentagon and I'll represent you. So I go to the Pentagon. I go into the hearing. He tells the story of his arrest. I was getting my little daughter ready for Sunday school, and they didn't have my record. So the guy who's the chair of the panel, you have 3 people on a panel, goes, Mr. Lynn, you and Mr. Merchants have talked about how they lost your records, and why should we believe you? And I said, well, if you turn how to be diplomatic about it. If you turn to the front page of your summary of the records that are in front of you, you'll see that the first sentence is, "It has been difficult to evaluate this case because so many of Mr. So-and-so's records are missing." They were still missing. They were missing then. It was another incredible screw up in the system. And I mean, as soon as we got ready to walk out, the clerk is thumbs up, like, of course you're going to win. And many, many years later, I've been on Oprah. Someday we talk about why I don't like Oprah.
Oh,
Oprah. I've been on Oprah. And this guy tracks me down and calls me, I think it was, and he says, "Saw you on Oprah this morning, and I just wanted you to know I've gotten my whole life back. I've been able to get my back fixed." One of his Purple Hearts is when a guy threw a hand grenade at a tree for some inexplicable reason, and the tree fell on this guy's back and crushed it. He said, "I've been able to get all my VA benefits. My whole life has changed." And that's the other lesson. You can never, ever lose track of who you're working for. You are not working for yourself or your organization. You are working for the people whose causes you are championing. That's it. If you lose sight of that, you know, might as well work for a pharmaceutical company.
yeah. And please don't do that.
No, I'm not going to do that.
Well, not you, anybody, please.
No, nobody should do that. No, they should. No, they should not do that.
This is that story again is just one of the many, many parts of the book. I mean, again, like I said, it's part history, it's part memoir, it's definitely an instruction manual. And if we can go ahead and put those three covers back up.
Sure.
Thank you so much for writing these books, Barry, and thank you especially for coming back on the show. Like I said, you are a hero of mine. I get very nervous when I'm talking to you.
No, that's okay. Doing a good job.
But I love you, and to have the chance to have virtually met like this is an honor of my lifetime, and I really want you to know that.
Well, I really appreciate it, and I'll tell you, the easiest way to get these books.
Oh yes.
Here's what you do. You can go to Blue Cedar Press. It's a little independent press that does a lot of progressive historical fiction and poetry. And this is their first real entree into trilogies, but at bluecedarpress.com. And if you want an even simpler way, bit.ly/Barry Lynn book. And then it'll take you to a page that shows this and tells you how you can get them at a discount.
Repeat that URL one more time, and we're going to put this in the description too.
Yeah, it's bit.ly/Barry Lynn book, and that'll take you right to where you want to go.
And please, folks, do me a favor. I'll tell you what. You just go and you get book 1, and I guarantee you're going to want to read book 2 and 3. And I can say even buy book 3, and you're going to want to.
Yeah, but if you buy them all, see, at the same time, there is an actual discount.
Right. Yes.
I mean, I just, I'm shamelessly publicizing it, but I have to, because I can't walk around with it. And I'm not really going to convince my granddaughters to sell the book alongside their lemonade.
Well, I'll tell you.
Thanks, Sean. I really always enjoy your thoughts, your comments, your show, and keep it up.
Thank you so much, Barry. And you have a wonderful rest of your day. And
all right,
everybody else, we'll see you next Tuesday.